Okay, we are still exploring World War One. There is so much here that there's no way that we can do this in one day, or obviously two or three. We have to take a few days to really examine a lot of what is going on because I need you to see a picture of what life looks like in war and some of the events leading up to it, and then, which we're going to talk about today, the events leading up to the U.S. getting into the war. And then um, I need you to see the effects of the war. So I want you to see causes and effects. All of the individual battles and that kind of thing. If that's something that interests you, you look that up and you research those. But I'm not going to go into the different battles. I'm going to talk about what life looks like on the home front, what it looks like when um, soldiers go away, and what does it look like for their families, and what does it look like a little bit about what it looks like at war. Okay, so today we're talking about the United States finally coming in and getting involved in the war. So I have here we come. And then the phrase I have down there in quotes is keep the world safe for democracy, because that is one of the phrases that Wilson used in his speech to Congress, telling them that he was ready to declare war. And he really made it a moral obligation, something that we should feel like we needed to do, that we are not just fighting because our feelings got hurt. We are fighting because we are joining the world in keeping it safe for democracy, meaning the ability to choose our own governments and run our own countries. Um, so, but one thing I read about Wilson, and this was pretty amazing, was he was very hesitant to bring us into war. And one of the reasons was he said that it changed people's minds, the way that they thought. They would always be wanting revenge. He would turn people into fighters, and he didn't want that to happen. That's very interesting. Not just, and also the idea of loss of life. But that wasn't just it. That war changes people in the way they, once you have war and you have war on a big scale, then that's an option and you'll just go to war. And maybe it is why there's more violence even in our own country among our own people, because we have this idea of war, that when you are not being treated right, or when someone infringes on your benefits or your rights, that you have an opportunity or the permission to fight for it. And I think that's what Wilson was afraid of. So I have some pictures here for you. This is a newspaper declaring war. Some soldiers getting ready to get on the train. Um, Lots of people wanted to sign up. It was a patriotic feeling. But at the same time, there were people who were called conscientious objectors. People who, because of their beliefs, felt like they should not kill other people and that they should not go to war. And you could register as a conscientious objector and then therefore stay out of war. But I was reading some stories of one who did that, and they were not treated well, because can you imagine all of the people that sacrificed to send husbands and sons over to war, and then you see someone perfectly able-bodied that is choosing not to go because of their beliefs, and it caused they had a lot of harassment because of their choice. So you had a lot of these posters. This is buying government bonds. Remember, I explained the idea of government bonds before, being that I am giving the government some money so that they can have the money they need for war, and then in exchange, I get a piece of paper that I turn in after the war to get money back. Lots of posters saying Uncle Sam wants you. And then this was, I came across this and I thought that was interesting, that there was an official war bulletin that was put out that had all of the information that they needed. And if they wanted what was going on with the war, and it says the different administrations here, the Food Administration, um, and the different things there that they could look at that war bulletin. Okay, I have had fun today. My brain has been all over the place. I have learned a million different things, and I'm trying to hone it down to know what to tell you. But there's just so many cool things, and as you study history, there's so many people out there that you don't know about that actually did something. Think about all the people living right now that are doing brave things, that are changing the world in their small corner of the world that you'll never know about. And so as I find these kind of random stories all over the place, it makes me excited, and I can't sit down and put together what I need because I keep finding new things. So I'm going to be able to share with you what I can. Okay, so first I want to start with, though, so why do we get involved? So this is kind of the timetable leading us to why the United States finally decides to do something. So 1915, so remember this is kind of back towards the beginning. 1915, the Lusitania is a passenger ship, and the Lusitania was sunk by a German U-boat. That was the type of boats that the Germans had. They were these submarine type boats that you couldn't see very well above water, and then they would attack your boat underneath the water, and then most of them sunk and most people died when you were hit by a U-boat. So the Lusitania was sunk by a German U-boat in 1915, and 118 Americans were killed. Now there was lots of other people killed, but they were from different countries. Now even at this time, there were lots of Americans saying, "They're attacking us. We need to go to war." I would say the general idea of the people was that we should go to war. But Wilson was trying to hold us out, probably just in his mind, as long as he could. I don't know if he thought we could be out forever, but as long as he could. 1916, we actually passed the National Defense Act, which starts us training some of our soldiers. So we're not sending anyone over yet. We haven't declared war, but it does get into process that we need to start training soldiers and getting them ready to fight and having people sign up to be in the military, even though we're not actively fighting yet, but we want people to sign up for our military. Now, this I found, and I never really thought about this, but there were some people that in the United States citizens, who, when the war broke out, wanted to fight in the war. So they went to Canada and joined the Canadian troops. They were already fighting. Or they went straight to Europe and joined up the fighting in Europe. You didn't have to wait for your country to get involved. They just went and said, "I'm going to fight. I'm going to go to Canada and join with them." Or "I'm going to go to Europe and join with them." They wanted to go ahead and do something. And I never really thought about that before. I thought if you were American, you just waited till we got involved. But there were many that didn't. In January 1917, Germany has a meeting with our Secretary of State, their ambassador. And Germany's ambassador, the Secretary of State basically says, "Look, we're sending ships constantly, merchant ships, across the seas, and you're attacking us, and you need to stop." Okay? So remember, what are our ships doing, though? If we're sending merchant ships, we are sending ships with supplies that are going over that are helping Britain fight the war, that are helping France fight the war. And mostly who we're supporting is the Allies. We joined the Allies eventually. Didn't put this on there, but I should have. We joined the Allies. So that's where our supplies are going. And Germany knows that. And so Germany's ambassador says, no, we're not going to stop. He doesn't even agree to stop or for Germany. It's not him completely, but he's speaking on behalf of the Kaiser and on behalf of Germany, and says, no, we're not going to stop attacking your ships. Okay, so that was the first step. Then in February, a coded telegram is intercepted by the British. And this coded telegram was sent to Mexico, and it was sent by Germany. And when it was decoded, we figured out that Zimmerman, who was like the spokesperson of Germany to Mexico, said, if you will join us in fighting basically we weren't in, but they were going to go ahead and fight us in fighting the war and in fighting the United States, then when we win, we will give you back some of that territory that you've lost. So Texas, New Mexico, guess what? When we win, we'll just let you have that land back. Wow, this is a big threat, because now the threat has moved to our border, and a land border. Not just way over the sea, but now we've got a threat right next door. And this needs to be dealt with. So this is called the Zimmerman telegram that was intercepted and decoded. So this again highlights another aspect of war, coded messages. And we have people that are developing codes that cannot easily be broken. And then we have very smart people who are hired to, and their specific job is to decode messages. Isn't that cool? Like, again, not necessarily things you would think of, but one country is not going to send a message to another country and it be intercepted by a spy or somebody like that, or just intercepted by foolishness or an accident. You're gonna protect it in any way that you can. So you do, codes are used. Invisible ink is used sometimes. That's another use of light. Sometimes ultraviolet lights are used to decode messages that can be put in like lemon juice or other things, and then you use a certain type of light to be able to see it. Okay. So this leads us to Wilson. After lots of debate, after lots of pacing the White House, after lots of meetings with his cabinet and with people that he trusts, on April 2nd, 1917, he goes to a session of Congress, and he basically lays out what has happened, and he asks them to, let's vote to go to war. And he was so distressed about what he was having to do. He did not want to do this. But everyone was so ready, and they knew that it was what they needed to do. And so everyone just thunderously applauded his speech and everything. And then when he left, he turned to someone that he was with and said, did you hear that applause? If they only knew what they were applauding for. Because he knew he was going in with a broken heart, realizing that soldiers were going to die, that this was going to change the country, and he knew that. And it broke his heart that he had to lead us. And then in our next lesson, we're going to see how hard he works to bring it to a conclusion, and not just a conclusion for this, but forever, so that we never have to do anything like this again. And it's his ideas and what he was wanting wasn't really accepted by the rest of the United States. And it is ultimately probably what led to his health failing at the end of his presidency. Okay, so the second he goes to Congress, Congress has to vote on it. So Senate votes, the House votes, then they send him the resolution of the declaration of war, and so he has it in his hand, and then he signs it on April 6th. And April 6th declares that we go to war. Now, but here's the deal. April 6th comes and goes, and the soldiers are not on the trains yet. It doesn't mean that April 6th, he signs the papers, and April 7th, we're in Europe. It doesn't work that way. He, well, and probably some people thought it should have. It didn't happen very quickly because we weren't ready. So they try to enlist men to be soldiers. Those men are sent to training. And then we don't have enough people volunteering for service. So he enlists the draft. The draft means that every man from age 21 to 30 has to sign up. Okay, so you have to sign up for military, and you can be chosen or you may not be chosen. But you have to at least register with the draft board. That means going to certain places, filling out the required paperwork so that it goes to the government, and then they kind of randomly choose how many they need. So 2 million soldiers were drafted during World War I, in addition to the ones that signed up on their own. So then we began training soldiers. So all of the ones enlisted and all of the ones drafted went to training camps all over the United States. So even if you lived in West Virginia and we didn't have a training camp close by, you might be sent to Fort so-and-so in Texas or Fort so-and-so in Washington, wherever there was a training place that needed you. So they began training soldiers, and some of our first soldiers began arriving in June. And when I say began arriving, I mean like in Europe. A lot of them went to Paris, went to England, but there was an Eastern Front and a Western Front. So there was lots of different places that you could be sent. There are pictures, I should probably put this on next time, of Turkish soldiers, and you had all kinds of people serving. You had Chinese, you had Japanese, you had Turkish who had turbans on their head, and they were using camels instead of horses to carry their supplies. So there was fighting in Africa. There was fighting in all over the world. We talk a lot about Europe because that's one of the places that we know the most about. But there was fighting everywhere. Maybe that's my next day of searching is going to be finding stories from different parts of the world. Now, one story I do want to tell you here that I found out about. There were so many people that wanted to really show their patriotism and their honor for their country by serving. There was a man in Alaska who took his dog sled and mushed over 100 miles to go to where he needed to sign up to volunteer for the Army. Then when he got there, the commander wasn't there, and they told him where he went. And then he mushed another 100 miles to get to where he was. So this man went by dog sled between 100 and 200 miles just to sign up to serve in the war. Now, we don't really know. They didn't have the records knowing exactly what happened to them, so I couldn't follow the story any farther than that, but I thought that was pretty cool story. Okay, so American soldiers were called Doughboys. I've heard a couple of different reasons for this. One main explanation that I hear is that the buttons on their uniform look like lumps of dough, and so they were called Doughboys. Another one is that the other soldiers that had already been fighting for so many years thought they were a little soft like dough, so called them Doughboys. And then another one I'm going to tell you about in a minute. There might actually be some truth to this, and it was their love of donuts, made by the girls from the Salvation Army. And so I'll show you something about that in a minute. That's kind of cool. Okay, so the American Expeditionary Forces, the AEF was what our army was called, was led by General John Pershing. And this is General John Pershing down here. This is just a picture of a American soldier. General John Pershing was the leader of our military for this whole, he was in command. And so he took the troops over at the beginning in about June. Then he led the first major all American offensive. Okay, that means leading his troops into direct battle, having a specific plan and an area to attack in September of 1918. Now, if you know what the end of the war is, the end of the war is November 1918. So this major offensive, it's called the Meuse-Argonne in France. This major offensive led by General Pershing was one of the things that led to the end of the war. So America does really get a lot of credit for helping the end of the war, even though we didn't fight a lot of it. 50,000 U.S. soldiers died in battle in all of World War I, and an almost equal amount died from accidents and disease, including the Spanish influenza, which started in 1918, and many soldiers and civilians and people in the United States and other places died from the influenza in 1918. So about 100,000 of our, what we would say, boys or our soldiers died during World War I, and not all of it was really as a result of battle. Okay, not just soldiers. This is where I could spend all day trying to find information, because what does the war look? The war involves so much more than just soldiers, and that's where my mind kind of gets blown, because there are so many other things happening, so many things needed that we don't think about. We just think about the guy in the uniform with the gun, and we don't think about how he gets there or who's supporting him, and or what he needs in order to do his job. So one of the groups that helped was called the American Librarian Association. Hey, librarians can go to war. How cool. They developed a war service, and they bought war bonds also as libraries, but they gathered books and sent used books to training camps in the United States and overseas. And there were even a few, and a couple, not very many, women librarians who went overseas to run these kind of portable libraries so that the men would have books to read. Remember, I told you that often it could be boring if they're not in direct fighting, and they needed books to read. And we wanted them to improve their minds and to learn things. So the Librarian Association encouraged the gathering of these books and then the distribution of them to soldiers. How cool. And a lot of the books were used for training or for studying, so that they could have something that they are learning about to go into when they finish, when the war was over. The Salvation Army is not just a thrift store. The Salvation Army is a group of people that was started a very Christian organization, started to serve the Lord by serving other people. And when John Pershing went over, the lady who was in charge of the Salvation Army convinced him to take 250 of her members with him when he went. And it was about half and half men and women. So they provided comforting services, like they would set up tents with food and snacks. They would have entertainment. They would help soldiers write letters home. They were the people that were not the soldiers, but they were there to help in any way that they could help. Now, this is what I alluded to earlier. This is cool. There were some girls that were with some soldiers, and they were all of their morale was low. They were sad, they were depressed, they were discouraged. So in order to encourage them, they started making donuts, and they didn't have a lot of supplies, but they had enough to make dough. And then they fried it in oil and then served the donuts to the men. And then it became something that they just did all the time, and they made thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of donuts by the end of the war, and they were known as the Donut Girls. So this is another reason some people may think that the Doughboys are called Doughboys because they liked the donuts so much that the girls were making. So I thought that was neat. At first, they were just doing like blobs of dough, and then someone asked for a hole cut out in the middle, and then they started doing that. This is not the first donuts, but they were not popular as a national snack until after World War One. Then all the soldiers came back and said, "Hey, I want some of those donuts." And they started setting up donut places all over the United States because these soldiers were coming back that had this memory of eating these donuts. Isn't that cool? There's so many things connected that I never realized. YMCA. I was looking on this list of soldiers that died and got medals, and on one of the lists it said civilians, meaning it's not someone in the military, and they were from the YMCA. And I thought, YMCA? Now again, YMCA stands for Young Men's Christian Association. This does not just mean a swimming pool. This was not started as just a place to go and work out. It was started as a place for young men to go and have a safe place to go. They could exercise, they could participate in activities, but it was meant to encourage them as young Christian men. And so they sent their members also, similar to what the Salvation Army did, to serve and boost morale, to help encourage, to write letters. They even helped some prisoners of war. I said that incorrectly. And helped with those like POW camps. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then another group of women that went were called the Hello Girls. These were the telephone operators. They operated the telephone switchboard so that the generals could get the messages to the front. See, the generals were somewhere else. They were not on the front fighting. They were in their headquarters figuring out what to do and where to tell the soldiers to go next and what to tell them to do. And the Hello Girls had to be on all the time. They had to be completely trustworthy. There were only a handful chosen. And they also had to understand at least French and English, but some other languages too. So they had to be bilingual and be responsible and able to take the pressure of lots going on and be able to be trustworthy with national secrets. So these were important people too that have been forgotten about and not recognized. Okay, so here's some pictures that have to do with those. This is a picture kind of about the Hello Girls. This is a war service poster asking people to provide used books to send to the soldiers. This is the Salvation Army one with the donuts. I love this. Oh boy, that's the girl. The Salvation Army Lassie, that's what she was called. And has showing him with a donut. And this is a picture of the Salvation Army girls making the donuts. And then this over here is the YMCA. So look at this. This is like what it would have looked like, a tent or a mess hall or something where they were giving the men to come for entertainment and rest and help. Okay. So what did people do at home? Women went to work in factories to take place of the men, the soldiers, that and also to provide war supplies. There, I sent a link to you that was talking about the factory that started in Nitro that was actually a gunpowder factory. There were gunpowder factories, there were gun factories, there were places building planes, building tanks, making uniforms, helmets. Think about all of masks, gas masks, all of the things necessary, and sending it over so that they would have their supplies. Families went without food and fuel to send overseas. The Food Administration was started and the Fuel Administration, and both rationed or kind of limited the amount of certain foods and fuel that you could use so that we would have enough to send over. And Herbert Hoover was put in charge of the Food Administration because he did such a good job with the Belgian Relief Organization when he got that started and other people were in charge. Hoover was put in charge of the Food Administration by Wilson. And so he helped organize our food program, and posters went up of encouraging people to have meatless Mondays, wheatless Wednesdays, so that they were saving those foods that could easily be shipped to the soldiers. Families were encouraged to plant victory gardens so that they were raising their own food and didn't need to buy the food from the stores that could be sent over. American Red Cross groups work to make and send clothing and gas masks. This is a picture of an example of one of the Belgian campaigns. It was called Self-Sacrifice Day. So you took one day aside so that you didn't eat as much or spend as much or use as much to put in that sack and give it to the Belgians, who many were starving and they were occupied by the enemy. So there were all kinds of ways for people to get involved. They did not feel like they weren't involved. It was a totally mind change. All of them were in it to fight it, to win it. So this change, think about how this changes women and women's roles. It's one of the biggest reasons why they get the vote after the war. Look at what they're doing. Look at what they're expected to step up and do, and that was never asked of them before. Absolutely amazing. Children were trusted to do things too. Think about if your mom went to work for the first time and you were expected to take care of your siblings at home, and you're 10 or 11 or 12. Okay. All right, so here's some pictures that remember I said propaganda was a big deal. There were posters everywhere encouraging people to do their part. I love this one. Which will your brother or sweetheart see? It's right up to the women now. Making munitions, that's bullets and ammunition, is a woman's job. So look, here's the woman in the factory compared to the woman sitting in her chair at home, lounging. And so they're using that guilt tactic again, right? What's your husband going to see? Is he going to see you doing this, or is he going to see you have stayed home and not helped him while he's fighting? Again, buying bonds is one way you could help. I love this. Stand by the boys in the trenches, mine more coal. We actually sent more coal miners into the mines during World War I. It was considered an essential service. So you could actually get out of going to be a soldier because you were working in the mines. So that's an interesting idea. We probably might have less people serve from West Virginia because many were serving in the mines rather than fighting, and their job was just as important because we needed coal, we needed the energy for ships, for planes. Think about it. You need that, and you don't want to use it on other things. I love this one geared towards children. Little Americans, do your bit. Eat cornmeal, mush, oatmeal, cornflakes, hominy, and rice with milk. Eat no wheat cereals, and leave nothing on your plate. So the idea that there are people starving, there are soldiers that don't have food, so you need to be careful about what you eat and how you eat it. And I love this. Fats are fuel for fighters. Bake, boil, and broil more, fry less. So don't use the oil. Think about how that would even affect your mother's cooking. Think about how that affected foods. You had less fried foods cooked in oil. You had more kind of mushy, baked, broiled foods. Okay, and last today, I know this has been long, but I'm learning a lot, and I want you to learn a lot too. This is stuff that I found that was just cool. Just plain cool, okay? And these were things that started because of the war. Daylight savings time started in order so that we would have an extra hour of daylight so that people could work longer and that you wouldn't need to use up so much gas in the evening time. So this is a really cool chart that shows it gives you another hour of daylight to work, and it reduces the light that you need to use in the evening. So it was started for World War One purposes. The law was repealed after World War One, but then they did it again in World War Two, and it never got stopped after that. Kleenex. Kleenex tissues were similar to the linings that they made to put in the gas masks for the soldiers. And so after war, they used the idea of the lining and made it into tissues that they mass marketed. Pilates. Pilates is a form of like exercise where you like stretch and move really in long movements, and it was developed by a German to give the prisoners of war something to do and to give their bodies some exercise while they were just sitting around. So I thought that was neat. And plastic surgery and prosthetic limbs, because you think about it, that's a need that you have afterwards. And I've also read, I should have put this there, that physical therapy was developed after the war because you've got people losing limbs and they need to learn how to walk again. That you've got things that developed because we never needed it before. There weren't this mass. Sure, there were people who had injuries before. Sure, there were people who needed plastic surgery, but not like the amount that you have coming out of a war. So the idea of being able to fix major problems that occurred in battle, or give you a limb if you lost an arm, to create a good prosthetic limb for that. So those are things that happened just because of World War II and as an effect of World War II. Okay, now we're still not done with World War II because we haven't gotten to the end of it and how we're going to get to the end. So we'll try to tackle that next. I talked about a lot today. I want you to pick one thing that you would like to learn more about. What one thing would you get on and search about? What one thing piqued your curiosity and made you want to go, ooh, that was cool. I'd like to know more about that. Okay, so put that down in your comments below. What one thing that I said would you like to look up more? And it could be that you just want to know more about John Pershing. Maybe you want to know the name of a soldier, or you want to know whatever, more about the Salvation Army, or more about the animals that were used in the war. Put one thing below that you would like to learn more about.